Welcome. I'm glad you could make it to our session. The thing that binds our 4 presentations today is making information digitally available. And this is important to our communities, to ourselves as human beings, and to our contributing our understanding of how things like objects and our coastal biology and our place names all fit together to help us understand who we are, where we've come from, perhaps where we're going, and to feed us with their stories and remind us of what our stories could be. So with that, my name is Anastasia Tarmann Lynch, and I'm a historical librarian, and I have lived a long time. No, I work at the Alaska State Library Historical Collections, and I'd like to introduce to you Laura Baker. And each person is going to do their own introductions, so I'm just going to leave it to Laura to introduce herself and her presentation.
Thanks, Anastasia. My name is Laura Baker, and I work for the Nature Conservancy here in Juneau. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference. They've done an excellent job, and we really appreciate all of Andy Hope III's contributions to the community in Southeast Alaska. And I'd like to, before I get started, I want to bring up Bob Sam from the Sitka Tribe of Alaska. He's been involved in the ShoreZone mapping project with helping our scientists on the ground understand what we're seeing when we're going around trying to inventory the entire coast of Alaska, and that includes the biology and the geology. But along the way, we're finding many archaeological sites, and Bob has been a huge asset in helping our scientists understand what we're seeing. So I'm going to bring him up to say a few words first.
First of all, I'd like to correct this. I live in Sitka. I wanted to mention how I met this lady in the Nature Conservancy. There's something very special about walking on your homeland, walking on the same trails, going to ancient village sites, fort sites, canoe haul-outs, legend sites. And there was something that we've seen in the past, but we never really knew what they were. And then I met a man named John Harper from British Columbia. And he talked about something that was very, very important and exciting. It added a new sacred place, and that was clam gardens. We never knew what these things were, and I wanted to mention them because they are so important to who we are as a people. And I think more emphasis should be placed on these clam gardens, because the repercussions are huge. That we actually had a technology such as that and since I found out about these clam gardens, most all of you know that we all have secret places where we go to gather clams. We try to keep it private, but now I found a way to find these places. At a low tide, you can see them, and they are very, very special. And I'm very grateful for the Nature Conservancy to help us identify them, because they are a technology and a culture that is so high, it just raises us higher as a people. And the respect that you have for us is important. So thank you for allowing me this time. It's really exciting to work with them and have met John Harper. So thank you.
So I'm presenting on originally a scientific endeavor that was begun in British Columbia in the early 80s. Dr. John Harper, as we said, has helped to pioneer this inventory of coasts. But since then, many people have put a whole bunch of energy into inventorying Washington, BC, and now we're in Alaska. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology of shore zone habitat mapping, and then I'll talk about the relevance and applications to your everyday life, and also to other applications, and the accessibility for you and everyone, for the public, the accessibility of this information. I'd like to thank a whole bunch of our partners. We have a huge list of partners, and it's growing by the day, especially to NOAA Fisheries for hosting. They put a huge amount of, and they've put a huge amount of investment into serving up all of this data and the photography and the videography that we're collecting. They're putting it up on these servers, and Alaska State DNR, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Coastal and Ocean Resources Incorporated are the geologists and biologists that have been working so hard as a partner to collect this information, along with Mineral Management Services, RCCL, Ocean Fund, the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, Southeast Alaska Petroleum Resources Organization, and Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service. There are just a whole bunch of partners here, and as we move up the coast, we get more partners and more people interested in what we're doing. So we really appreciate everyone's input. So the goal of ShoreZone is to map and the entire shoreline of Alaska, and they brought this project up here in 2001 for the Cook Inlet. The Cook Inlet Regional Citizens Advisory Council thought that this would be a good way to inventory the Cook Inlet. Little did they know that eventually we thought, well, it'd be great for Prince William Sound, and what about Southeast Alaska? And what about the entire state of Alaska? And it was a vision that they didn't think possible, but the advance in technology and the amount of data and information being collected in this project is has gained so much momentum and so much importance in many people's lives that, again, it's a huge partnership, and it's very important. We're going to classify and inventory the geologic and biologic attributes of the shoreline, and that includes anthropological changes. And what I want you all to think about today is that this information that we're gathering are through photos and videography and commentary, and they're telling stories about local habitats, but I want you to think about the perspective that this is having from looking from the ocean to the forest, and how this imagery that's being captured, Dr. Harper has pointed out, and others have pointed out, this really captures the perspective from the maritime cultures that have lived here for thousands of years, and they're looking from the ocean into the forest. And we are capturing an inventory of these most productive areas. the imagery of the intertidal areas and the estuaries where the rivers and the glaciers are meeting the ocean. These are the places, the kelp beds, the eelgrass beds, that are sustaining foods that people have been collecting for thousands of years. And the forage fish, these are the nurseries of the ocean. And marine fish, you walk around in the eelgrass beds taking surveys, and there's lots of little baby halibut all over the place. St. John the Baptist Bay in Sitka is one of the primary bays for little juvenile sablefish. Herring, this is where the herring are at. So these places are extremely important for many resources. At the same time, these photos are documenting historic and archaeological sites, sacred sites, and we have to be very sensitive about how we're putting that information out to the public. And so while the photos are up, we don't necessarily document, we don't necessarily make it searchable. So we're not saying that these are archaeological sites. So we're very careful to put that information in a database, but not make it searchable for the general public. So we're working on that. Again, all of Alaska, so from southern Southeast Alaska, this is Prince of Wales, southern Prince of Wales, up into the central islands, up to the Yakutat area and Glacier Bay National Park. Again, it's a huge tool for science, educational resources, cultural studies. We could go on, and you guys can probably think of lots of other ways to be using this information. So I'm going to jump into how we collect the data and why we do it. What happens is we've got two phases of the project. One phase where you're up in a helicopter and you have a biologist and a geologist on one side of the helicopter. You have your pilot and a navigator on the other side. And the biologist, and you're flying about 300 feet above sea level, and we're taking oblique photos, so you're taking photos. The biologist is taking photos, the geologist is taking video, and also they're hooked up to microphones, and so they're also talking about what they're seeing. So you have several sets of information. You've got video, you've got high resolution photos, and you have commentary of what they're seeing from the helicopter. And once you have all that data collected, and then that happens at the lowest tides of the summer, so you can get the most biology, and you can also, during the lowest tides, what we're trying to get is the information in the low tide area, because none of it's ever been inventoried, and we don't really know, we don't collectively know what is all there along the whole state or the region. So a lot of people ask, well, why don't you just use Google Earth? And the reason why we're not just using satellite data is because satellites tend to capture imagery at the when the light is best for them, which is at noon. And you all probably know that in the summer, the low tides are at 4 or 5 in the morning, and so we need to get out there at 3 in the morning and get the helicopters up and get them at zero tide or lower early in the morning, and these satellite imageries, it's just not collecting the kind of data that we need to understand these areas. So that's the first stage, is the field stage, and then the second stage is going into the lab, the computer lab, putting all this information on the computer and actually mapping it. And what we're, so I'll talk a little bit about the mapping, but some of the things that we're collecting, information on wave exposure. These geologists know what the exposure level is, and the geology or the geomorphology, how these things were formed. Sediment texture, like fine sands, cobble grains, pebbles, if it's rocky or if it's tidal flats. This is saying subtidal algae, that would be kelp. And the intertidal marsh areas, and then the anthropogenic features. One of the things that the human eye can pick up is color very well, and the colors of the species assemblages along the coast, you've probably noticed this just subconsciously, and you've got species assemblage along the shoreline at certain elevations, and these are very specific to how much wave energy they're seeing, when these things are exposed to the air, and so they're along very specific elevations, each of these species assemblages and critters, and we're calling them biobands. So you have, when you're walking along the shore and you don't want to step in the slippery black lichen at the very top, well, that's the very top of the splash zone that's getting influenced by seawater. And then you go down a little farther, you're going to hit the barnacles. You go down a little farther on the rocky shores, you're going to hit the fucus, and on and into the lower tidal zone. And you can see this from the air. And so these are the things that we're inventorying. This is just another schematic of the information that we're inventorying, the supra, the inner, the subtidal, and then all the different biobands of those areas, depending on the geomorphology. So, for example, this is just a picture of bull kelp. This is a massive bioband of kelp that we're seeing, and then you can see some of the upper bands of fucus and barnacles as well. Huge beds of eelgrass, zostra, in the Craig area, west coast of Prince of Wales, all up through Sitka. There are huge amounts of eelgrass that have never been inventoried, and these are the nurseries of the little fish that were, for commercial fisheries, subsistence use, personal use fisheries. These are the places that are producing these fish, and it's good to know where they are so that we can do a good job of protecting them. And marsh areas, of course, are very important for primary productivity, and they're really important for critters and us as well. Brown bear and salmon rearing, and marshes are important. This is Shinnecoe Inlet, huge bands of rockweed. Okay, so anyway, those are just examples of the kinds of biology that you're seeing out there. And then what happens is you get this stuff, you get all this imagery in the lab, and we break them up into units. So thousands of kilometers here that people are going through each and every kilometer and breaking them up into units. They're digitizing them into the computer so that it's digital information. It has a unit number, and then the geologists go in and talk about what the geology of the area is. So you've got beach berm, pebble cobble over sand. There's all these terms that the geologists use. And then you have the various biologists, or you have biologists come in and talk about the biology of the different zones. And then you can start to map these things out and start to see, where does the bull kelp start, where does it end, where does the giant kelp start and end, where do they overlap. These things are very important, especially from a regional scale. But the interesting thing about this data is that you can see it from a regional scale, but you can also see it from but then you can look at the photos and you can see it from a very detailed scale. These are just maps of seagrass where you've got surfgrass, eelgrass, and then where they are put together. And these start to tell you a lot about the information of our coastal areas. So this is an example of a flight line that these helicopters are taking. I wouldn't have wanted to be on this flight because I would have puked. But anyway, as you know, our coastline is extremely complex, and lots of little islands, and we're trying to get every piece of shoreline. And as we do this project, we're getting a more exact understanding of the shoreline, whatever that means. And our shoreline is increasing because we're counting the number of kilometers that we're flying here. This is just a schematic of how we're breaking up, and I'm going to run through this because it's just a schematic of how we're digitizing the information. You have your unit breaks. Yeah, you have your unit breaks. Everything is being recorded through a global positioning system or GPS track, and everything is associated with a latitude and longitude, so it's all geo-referenced. And you have your digital photos, and once in a while you'll have something like a rocky outcropping in the middle of some just shoreline that's all the same, so that will be a point. If you're a GIS person, you know what I'm talking about. And we put all this information on top of a base map that already exists, like the USGS maps or the Tongass shoreline. What we're finding is that a lot of times these shorelines are inaccurate, and so if they find major inaccuracies, the ShoreZone project is going to actually change some of the shoreline, and so they have an up-to-date base map, but that's sort of another issue in terms of the fact that we need just better base maps altogether. So we're not going to, we don't deal with that a whole lot. So the applications of this are numerous, as you can imagine. You have all the great information that we can use for habitat modeling, and a lot of new information on where these different species assemblages occur on a regional scale, and you can begin to understand just more about why critters are using the habitats that they're in. Permitters, you have permitting going on in very remote locations, and a lot of times, you know, most of the time permitters aren't going to go out and visit this site where a dock is going in or a new lodge or something. And so this gives permitters you know, a way to do some desktop reconnaissance. And then on bigger projects, obviously they still need to go out into the field. We recognize that. But at least this way they can go out. At least this way they can see what's going on the ground, where are the eelgrass beds, where are the kelp beds, and begin to understand what they're looking at when a project comes across their desk. This has been a huge tool for oil spill response and catastrophic event planning. It's when a spill happens, it's really important that you know what it is you need to protect, where places of refuge are for your responders, for all your boats that are going to be going out there, for your boom equipment. And so you can, you know, if a spill happens at 3 in the morning, which they usually do, you can go to your laptop, you can, the responders can put in the lat longs of where the spill happened and bring up that imagery so they know what kind of coastline they're dealing with in these remote areas. And they've started using it pretty often. We'd like it to eventually to become part of the Coast Guard's protocol to use the information, but that's a long way off, but that's kind of a vision. Another application that has been very useful is understanding cultural sacred sites, sacred sites, and the huge amounts of information gathered on places. These are the places that people are living, working. These are the places that people have, these are the places where people have lived for thousands of years and where people live now. And it's important to inventory that. So for example, potential village sites. We don't know if this is a village site, but if you're studying these areas, you can probably look at this picture and understand there are a lot of aspects of this area that would tell you things that indicate that this is a really important site. I'm not I chose not to necessarily put place names on these because it's sensitive, but I'm just trying to give you examples of the things that we're collecting. Bob Sam talked about clam gardens, and basically when the ShoreZone crews were flying in areas of BC, they came across these geological features that the geologists had no idea what they were, and they weren't able to classify them in this box or that box. So they started getting on the ground and asking people, and after about 4 or 5 years of talking to people, they finally found the people who understood what these were in BC, and they talked about them as traditional clam gardens. And places where people there were clam beds originally, and then just over generations, you go out and the families would use these clam beds over and over, and you start to push the rocks out farther into the zero tide line, and more sediment comes in and creates more clam habitat, and your clam garden gets bigger. And keeping these up were really important, because if you get too many clams, then you have anaerobic conditions and it can get nasty. But if you keep up your gardens, it was a type of agriculture, and that's what Bob was referring to. Is there have been, I think it's mischaracterized that these were not agricultural people, and it ends up that yes, there was definitely agriculture going on in these places. So these have been found around Sitka, Prince of Wales, and Wrangell so far. And we know that we haven't inventoried them all. And we know there's a lot of work to be done to educate the tribes and clans about what's going on out here on the coastline and what we're finding. And there's a lot of work to be done there. There's fish traps. Just another example of the kinds of imagery that we're collecting, and really important for archaeological and historical inventories. More fish traps. Example of canoe runs on northern Prince of Wales Island, west coast. Shinnecoe Inlet, another potential village site. So I'll let you guys ask lots of questions later, but Washington State has been done in this methodology. BC is done, and actually more than 50,000 kilometers in Alaska has been imaged and mapped. And so the goal is to finish Alaska. And so it's nearing a continental data set, so you can begin to talk about resources along this entire Pacific Northwest coast. And it's, I think when we begin to talk about, well, geez, we found the clam gardens in BC, and now we're finding them in Sitka and Wrangell and Ketchikan, that shouldn't be a surprise, but I think it tells us something that, I think it tells us that we have a lot to learn. And this is what's done in Southeast Alaska so far. Everything in any color is imaged, and we have QU, Southern Admiralty, a little bit of Central Southeast yet to go, and Glacier Bay is not complete yet. And then actually up the coast is now imaged, up the lost coast. So how is this information accessible to you? Mostly through our website. If you want to write this down, you can, but you could also Google Alaska ShoreZone NOAA. But anyway, it's alaskafisheries.noaa.gov. You can see it up there. If you guys want me to help you out and find the site, I can. So we're posting a whole bunch of the imagery, as much as is, we're not posting every single image, because that would be way too much information, but we're posting every couple of seconds of the imagery, and then the videography is also being posted, and it's 1-second captures of the videography. So what you do when you get to alaskafisheries.noaa.gov/maps, etc., is you'll see a page that looks like this, and you go down and click on the ShoreZone website link, because this is sort of the introduction so people know what we're talking about here. And then you go down and click on the link. And then once you click on the link, you'll get to a map that shows all of Alaska, and then you can use your zoom in tools at the top. I'm not going to go through this in detail. We can do that. You can corner me and we can actually go through it together if you'd like me to another time. But anyway, you can zoom into the area that you want to go fly. Usually it's around 2 or 3 kilometer increments that you can get there. You zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and then you select your flight line that you actually want to fly, and you can start flying the coastline. And also the little blue squares on the map are pictures, so you can click on them and then you can get a picture. So that's the high-res photo that comes along with what you're seeing as you're flying along the coastline. And then below, there are sets of data below that tells you what the various resources are. Again, the archaeological resources are not on here. We did that on purpose because I think it's because everyone decided that it was highly sensitive information, and it's not. But you can still get the information. It's just in a different format. And people actually have to come and actually want to get the information and have good reasons to use it. So in summary, everything's geo-referenced. It's all spatial. It can be mapped. It approaches a continental data set, but it's cool because you can drill down and into very small scale features. We're hoping that it's easily available to the public, and sometimes the site isn't working and sometimes the site's slow. But the good thing is that we're revamping the site completely because it is a little clunky and it's 1990s technology, and so it's going to be completely revamped in the next couple months, and it'll be much easier to use. And then lots of potential for a whole bunch of things between trip planning. If you're going out for a fishing trip and you think, geez, there might be a storm coming and we need places of refuge to go and a cove to go into, you can start to find these places. You might already know these places, but some people don't necessarily know these places. Educational information, research. And with that, I'll take questions. Dr. Jody Harney helped put this presentation together along with Dr. Mandy Lindeberg with NOAA Fisheries and the Alaska Science Center. And we can take questions. So the question was, have we, in the 5 years that we've been doing this project, have we noticed any changes in the coast? And the short answer to that is probably not, because we're only going to each place once. And each place is different. And so we're not going to be able to pick up patterns of change necessarily. This is baseline information. Now, once in a while, we'll pick up on very interesting and cool things happening, like huge barnacle die-offs. We'll go, oh, geez, we know there should be a barnacle bioband there, and you'll see remnants of it, but it's all gone. So you see stuff like that, but you can't necessarily infer any sort of patterns going on there or changes. What you can do is use this information as a baseline, and then you can start to bring in other layers of information like herring spawn data, for example, over years and years of data collection. You can overlay, and that's the beauty of having this in GIS format. You can start to overlay this information and start to see what are the habitats as a baseline, and then start to see changes through your other data. So the topic of conversation is point source pollution, pollution inputs, and I work for the Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy is very much concerned about pollution in Southeast Alaska, not only pollution that's happening every day from cruise ship discharge and municipal discharge and that kind of stuff, but also oil spills and risks that are associated with it. Again, what ShoreZone does is it gives you some baseline information to, because if you're a GIS person, you know that actually we have information where the cruise ships discharge every year. There's information on that and the zones that happen because of that, and you can start to actually see the picture of what's going on once you have the habitats and then the places of pollution or fill or all the anthropogenic changes going on here. Everyone says, well, this is never going to become Puget Sound because it's so remote. And once you start to see, we have the technology now to start to see, this is a big area, but there are a lot of impacts going on here that we just don't see every day. So this is something that helps us see those.
It sounds like to me that kind of the same concern that I had, wondering what was going to be in changes over the years, and if it was changes because of pollution or changes because of patterns that just happen. And I don't know, are you guys ever looking toward the future of being able to go through the coast, like maybe every other year to see the changes? I mean, I know it's expensive to do that, but like I think that'd be a great asset for Alaska in general.
No. The answer is no. Maybe every 10 or 20 years. But again, it just comes back to this is baseline information because it's such an expensive project. But at the same time, you can go to certain sections of the coast and maybe do this over again. But that's a question we get all the time, and it's like it's about $152 a kilometer between the mapping and the imaging. You multiply that by thousands and thousands of kilometers and you come up with millions of dollars. So it's too expensive to use this as a regular tool, but it's a baseline tool. So there are a couple of, there's environmental sensitivity index mapping that happened, and they only mapped about 3 attributes: wave exposure, sediment type, and there's 2 parts to that. There's 2 answers to that question, actually. There was a whole, Alaska Department of Natural Resources went through and did an area planning exercise, coastal mapping and area planning with communities. Okay, those are not digital, and actually, we're on a mission to digitize them because a huge amount of community effort and a huge amount of effort went into working with communities to talk about where resources are, what are people using, how are they using these coastal resources, and they are bound up in these very fat books called the Central Southern Southeast Alaska Area Plan and the Northern Southeast Area Plan. These area plans are massive. They have a whole bunch of really important information in them for every bay and estuary that people use, which is every place in Southeast Alaska, but they're not digital. And we're applying for a grant to change that, actually, because we think it would be really important to be able to overlay all the management status that they worked in from the area planning process, and put that over the actual habitat, so you can begin to see, oh yeah, well this is why they collect what they collect here. And yeah, that's a big gap, and you're right on with the need for that. The other one about reconceptualizing the units into how indigenous uses were allocated, and that so that brings us to the place names. My colleague Dave Albert worked very closely with Andy Hope III to develop the place names maps for Southeast Alaska for the Tlingit place names, and also included some Haida and a little bit of Tsimshian mapping. Eventually, it would be appropriate to start to incorporate these maps into the ShoreZone framework. I think it's we're a little far out from that, because I think it's going to take a huge amount of funding and effort to do that. But I think it would be really important, because then you can really start to see. They talked about this yesterday, about having the pictures and the stories and the names all together, and I think that's where we can go with this information. The technology's there. We just have to make it a complete effort. As for the units, they're about 250 meters long. We try not to make them, it's more of an economical issue of how long do you make your units. Well, when you're up on the coast north of Yakutat into Copper River, the coast is very similar, so you'll have very long units. But units are broken up mostly by geomorphology and biology, and you're right in that they aren't necessarily broken up by indigenous criteria per se. But at the same time, sometimes those things match quite nicely. When you're seeing the areas of the canoe runs or the fish traps, those places are there because of the way that the geology and the biology was working. And so sometimes they probably match, although I don't know that. So it'd be interesting to take a look at that. So the young man's question here was about how do we ground truth this information? How is it that when we're up in the air, we know what we're seeing and that we're... Yeah, so getting on the ground is an important thing. And we have several ways to do that. We have ground stations where it's sort of randomized, and you go down and you actually take a full inventory of the biology that's down there, and then actually taking measurements, so that when you're saying, well, this is about 250 meters, and you're saying that from the air, you get on the ground and you measure that, and it could be very different. And so we're doing a little bit of ground truthing, although probably not as much as the biologist would like to see, because but you can do that at any point. So you don't have to do it while you're flying. You can go back to those places, and a lot of that information is going to be very much the same. Unless there's a major change in environmental conditions, but you can go back and do that. So it's actually, right now, it's sort of opportunistic, especially when the biologists see something that they don't know what it is. And these biobands, we're saying, oh, it's a fucus bioband in southeast Alaska or in southern southeast. There might be different critters in there in northern southeast or in Cook Inlet or BC. So that's also important. We're going to incorporate that information into the ShoreZone database over the next couple of years. All this takes a lot of time, but that's a good thing to remind us of. Any others?
My Tlingit name is Stayston. I'm Akwan from Juneau, and my English name is Victoria Canal-Den. And you said something that made me curious. You said there were inaccuracies found with previous shoreline mapping, and so I was kind of wondering which the organization's thoughts were on that, why and how that could be, so on.
Well, the Nature Conservancy's thought on that is that we would love to have the USGS, the state of Alaska, and a whole bunch of partners step up and improve the baseline shoreline and have a real estimate of where the high tide line is of the supertidal zone, because you end up having all kinds of interesting land ownership issues, and we don't really know where the high tide starts and stops. We do, but it's an elevational issue. It would be a huge undertaking for the state of Alaska to do this, but it's something that's going to have to get done eventually. basically our shoreline base maps from USGS, the Tongass. The Tongass is pretty good. That's the base map that they use, but they're not always accurate. It's a very, actually, it's just, it would be a huge amount of effort to actually get the elevation of these places. And then you would know, once you have the elevation of these places, then you would actually be able to accurately map these places. But you also have issues like isostatic rebound and eroding coastlines. And so that makes a big difference as well. So it's a big... Climate change is certainly a factor in all of this. That's a big topic. And again, what ShoreZone does is it gives you a baseline from which to start to understand changes happening to the coast. But what's been pointed out to me by the geologists especially is that even, say you have highly erodible coasts, you have coasts eroding, especially anywhere north of the Bristol Bay and into the Arctic, the Seward Peninsula. These places, you've got a lot of major changes happening, but it doesn't mean your coastline type is actually changing. And so what we can do is say these types are very susceptible to erosion, and you apply that to planning. And so your type isn't going to change, but the area might change. And so that's how we look at that, is that, okay, these, you can start to decide and make decisions about places that are changing, increased wave exposure and changes in temperatures and salinity, and plan and know where those types of places are. So it's a good question. So I think that's it. Thank you, and feel free to talk to us and contact us. My number is 586-8623. I'm in Juneau. Call me up anytime or email, and we have a lot of work to do. Thanks.
Matsiati, we'd like to say Gunesh Cheesh to the Akwan people for allowing us to have this conference and attend this conference on their territory. We're going to present about stories of coastal and interior people, and we're looking for connections with Tlingit people. And I'll just introduce myself, but I'm going to do it in Southern Shoshone language. Oh, Frances is supposed to introduce herself first.
INJ, Frances Woolsey, Oye, Danke, Angie, Kuala Ma, Ye Gaotsan, Aganda, Inchi, Daklawadi, Ichi, Konden, Koatan, Ichi, Ama, Amy Clathro, Oye, William Clathro, Oye, Asua, Jenny Labarge, Oye, Asia Labarge Billy, Oye, Athalia.
Ayinji Gail Anderson Uye, Denke, Dekaima Uye, I Fiat Uye, Hajat Ichi, Kwata Ninje, Kwanlen Kwatsan Iche, Ama Kathleen Jones Uye, Ata Gordon Jones Uye, Atsua Rachel Dawson Uye, Dunke Fiat Uye, Atsia George Dawson Uye, Dunke Kalajo Uye, and Atsua Ida Peters Uye. Klahu.
Danacha, Ayinji Mark Nelson Uye, Dunke, Uyunji Natsat Uye, Kwanlin Ninje, Edmonton Kwatsani Che, Ta and Kwachan Council in Dasidla, Klahu, Shonithan. Good morning, everyone. Just do a quick outline of what we're going to cover in our presentation. We're going to introduce the Tahan people, who they are. We'll discuss the genealogical and linguistic and historical links between Tahan and Tlingit peoples. We're going to talk about how tools like the Place Names and Stories website we've developed called Danan Kwanje, Our Land Speaks, can help teach about stories and relationships. And we're going to propose further future collaboration to document these kind of stories and relationships. So I'll turn it back over to Gail.
Who are the Tahan? We're the people of Tarmann, Lake Labarge in the Yukon. Our government is based in Kwanlin, Whitehorse. And we're descended from Klonde and Klonda, women from the Tagish area of the Daklawati clan. Many Tahan have Tlingit names, and some are registered with the Tlingit Haida Council. This is a map of the traditional territory for the Tahan Council. And a lot of our area is overlapped with Kwanlin Dun First Nation in Whitehorse. And most of us are related to each other, but there's 2 First Nations in the Whitehorse area. Our genealogy is from the Tagish Daklawati, from Tagish Kwan. And Mandesa, who is the Oman chief, and Klonde settled in around Lake Labarge. And they had several children: Shuting, Maggie Broom, Kishut, Jim Boss, Tussuxo, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, Jenny Dawson, that was my great-grandmother, Shantlen, Susie Jim, and Andie, and our understanding is he didn't have an English name. And the current citizens of Tahan, the majority are descendants from these people. And I will let Francis talk about Klonda and Tom Smith.
I want to share with you today some of my family's history. Grandmother Jenny Labarge's mother, Klonda, was a Daklawati woman from Tagish. Grandfather's name was Cluckshawn from Angoon, Alaska. As my grandmother tells the story, her mother, Klonda, met and married her father, Cluckshawn, when he came to Tagish with a Tlingit trading group in the late 1800s. Klonda went with Cluckshawn to Angoon, Alaska, where grandmother Jenny was born. There was a disaster that took place in Angoon and the people migrated out. Klonda and Cluckshawn stayed in Klukwan for a time, then went on to Tagish. Today, Cluckshawn and Klonda, my great-grandparents, now have 235 descendants. There is more to this story, but time today is of essence.
There are Tlingit linguistic connections within our language. We have Tlingit place names that are currently used, and one is Kusawa Lake, and it's Kusawua, Long Skinny Lake. The next one is the Tikini River, and it's Takini. And according to a person by the name of Kraus, it means Mosquito River. And then the next place is Tatnana, and it's King Salmon Country. Oh, it's dog salmon, not king salmon. Tlingit place names that are older and not commonly known from the Chief Koklut's map is Klux Datsei for Lake Labarge, maybe meaning white fish scale. And we have Tlingit personal names. Clonde and her children and grandchildren have Tlingit names. Many are still used today. And one of the names that is Shuteen and Kishut. And these are the people that have Tlingit names that for their personal names. Shuteen Maggie Bruin, she's the daughter of Clonde, and Kishut, Chief Jim Boss, is the son of Clonde.
So, as I said, my name is Mark Nelson. I'm the Heritage Manager with Tonquichan Council, and one of the projects that I've had the fortune of working on is this website, Danan Kwanjay, Our Land Speaks. It's the product of many years of research by Tonquichan people and other partner researchers before, and the elders had said that they wanted this information to be in a form where children, Tonquichan children and citizens could use it and learn from it in the kind of contemporary school environment that they spend a lot of time in now. So we developed this site, and I'll actually go to the live site here because we have wireless internet, so it's kind of better if I can show you the interactive version. So this is the home page, www.ton.ca/placenames, and I do have some rack cards here if anybody wants to grab copies. I have some up here, so feel free to come get them. So when you go here, let's see if we can get a full screen. There's an introduction page, and you can get a little bit of background on the site through these pages here, and how the site came to be and things like that. When you hit enter, it takes you into the map area. And so it's an interactive map kind of thing, powered through Yahoo Maps, same idea as Google Maps, Google Earth, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. You can drag around the map and look at different places. You can zoom in and out. And so each one of these red icons you see is a place, and if you mouse over it, it shows you what it is, and if you click on it, ooh, there's a glitch. There, it's supposed to do that. It opens up, and it gives you some information about each place. There is a sound file of the elder pronouncing the name for the place, and pictures which you can open up to a larger size. And you can also search for individual places over here, and all the places listed are on this scroll bar over here. So, for example, you can one of the places that Gail mentioned with a Tlingit connection, Dog Salmon Slough, which when we were researching, Southern Shoshone people know it by the name Tatlani, but it's a Tlingit origin name from Tit and for dog salmon and Ani for country. So it's one example of those linguistic connections that sort of bridge the coastal interior divide and through people's relationships. And as Gail explained, the Ta'an being descended through the Doklawedi clan in Tagish area. So I thought the purpose of our presentation is to talk about connections through stories and language. And one place that is particularly important as far as these kind of relationships is called Nalyen. I'll just find it here. Or Nalyen Dal, Dal meaning mountain. Here's a picture, and I'll just zip back to the PowerPoint here. Okay. So Nalyen is a mountain located on the Tikini River. What's that? Oh, I see. Okay. So Nalyen is a mountain located on the Takini River, near a spot called 31 Milepost, Llyrdeal. And it's a powerful spiritual site that's known for ceremonial use. It's also known by a combination Tlingit and Southern Shoshone name, meaning frog house, and it refers to a claim of ownership of the mountain through Mrs. Annie Ned, who was of the Champagne-Ajac First Nation, whose Tlingit name was Frog Mother. It was known as a spot of connection. It's fairly close to the end of Kusawa Lake, and then on down the Takini River, which was an important travel route for Tlingit traders coming to the interior. And so there's stories of it being used by interior people as a signal. So when Tlingit people were coming, they would go up and light a fire, and it would let other people further inland know that Tlingit traders were coming. Skip to the picture here. Actually, so here you can see Kusawa Lake down here, and the Takini River flows down here. And there's where Nalyen is located right there, a little bit west and south of Lake Labarge. And you get an idea here. It's a pretty prominent feature on the landscape. It's it's surrounded by a lot of flatter area, so it really stands out. I mean, when you're flying by it in a chopper, you notice it immediately. It's also the site of a story that was shared with us by Elder Louis Smith, who his father Charlie is Jenny Labarge's brother. And it's a story about how Nalyen figures in a time of conflict between interior people and Tlingit people, and how that conflict was resolved. So it talks, this story is featured on the Danan Kwenje website, and it's sort of one example of how that site can be used as an educational tool. And Louis reviewed this and said that this story was okay to use in this context. So a group of Tlingit traders were killed in a conflict near the Pelly River in the Yukon. And then several years later, a group of Tlingit people came back to the interior to settle that debt for the wrongdoing that had happened. And some of them climbed up Nalyen to look around for people, to see where people might be staying. And two of the young Tlingit men who were there, they encountered a bad omen when they were up on Nalyen, and they were told that they should go back to the coast, but they didn't listen, and they didn't heed that omen. And so the Tlingit people saw people camped over at Swan Lake, called Tloquashun in Southern Shoshone, and they traveled over to the lake, and they attacked the people who were there, and the two Tlingit boys who hadn't heeded the warning, they were killed in that battle, and along with many of the people who were at Swan Lake. And as Louis explained it, after that, the debt for the wrongdoing was repaid, and the good relationship resumed, and people were friends again, and it went on from there. So that's one example of a story that, and part of our reason for being here is to talk about more stories, to look for more connections, to build relationships for future research. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Gail.
The future connections or collaboration is to share our stories about relationships, to document further genealogical connections, to document Tlingit place names to interior places and clarify the names recorded on the Chief Tlokluk's map wherever possible, and to bring related people together to share stories. Gunish Chish Shonithan. Thank you.
Lucy Fowler Williams was not able to make it. She had a family emergency, and it wasn't really an excuse. It was it was a legitimate excuse. She really wanted to be here. So she created a short PowerPoint to let you know what she's been doing to update the Shotridge project. And also, we have Lily Hudson has been working with us at the Alaska State Library. I was hoping that she could be here today. She wasn't able to make it, but I'd like to give her a lot of acknowledgement for the hard work she's done on this project, too. I'll just quickly introduce Lucy. She's from the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And she is working on the Lewis Shotridge Digital Archive. This is what she says about herself. I propose to build on my 2007 presentation by sharing our progress on the creation of the Lewis Shotridge Digital Archive at the Penn Museum. The purpose of the archive is to make Lewis Shotridge's exceptionally well-documented collections of Tlingit and Tsimshian objects, photographs, and research records available to Northwest Coast peoples. That's a lot of what we're talking about, and the general public over the internet, so we can all make those connections. The website will be launched in the fall of 2009. I plan to introduce Lewis Shotridge, the Tlingit historian, who worked for the Penn Museum as assistant curator from 1915 to 1932, to provide an overview of the Shotridge archive database and to share preliminary drafts of the design of the archive website, which is organized according to Shotridge's categories. The project involves collaboration and support from the Institute, Museum, and Library Services, Tlingit specialists, the Alaska State Library, Schoenberg Center for Electronic Text and Image, and Penn Center for Native American Studies, as well as CCTHITA, and I don't know what that is. I think we need to quit the habit of acronyms, personally. What's that? Oh, thank you. That's very important. Okay, Tlingit and Haida Central Council. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to play Lucy's presentation for you. So here's the overview. Lucy was going to give an introduction. I think I just gave an introduction to the project. The role the Alaska State Library is playing in this project is, we had a trunk full of Shotridge's cards. They're genealogy cards, and you will see some examples of them. They were divided up somehow, we don't know how. And we were lucky enough to have them, and we were contacted by the Penn Museum, University of Pennsylvania Museum, and they said, you know, we've got hundreds of these cards, and we've got about 400 objects, I think, artifacts and regalia. And the cards we have match their objects. And so they were very interested in putting this website up so that Tlingit people could get a sense of what they've lost, basically. You know, museums and libraries and archives are in transition, especially museums, because of the Repatriation Act. And I hope that you will attend Harold Jacobs and Steve Henrikson's presentation on repatriation. I think it's tomorrow. But I'm really ad-libbing, but I think all of this is very important because it's central to this whole project. So you can read, here are the partners. The website will be up in the fall. You'll see a couple of pictures from it. In Lucy's presentation, there is a short biography of Shotridge's life. If you would like to know more about Louis Shotridge, we do have information about him at the Alaska State Historical Library. Lots of folks have written articles about him as well, and I'd be glad to help you find that information when you come in. We're on the 8th floor of the State Office Building, and I think it's a good idea to come in because all of these digital tools are great, but actually coming in and experiencing the information is different, as you all know. Okay, here's a little bit about Shotridge. So his goal was to record the clan histories through written texts. He documented the genealogies, myths, and songs. The genealogies, as I said, are on cards. You can see that he developed a dictionary, and he was an avid photographer, and he took lots of photographs of artifacts that they're using on this website, as well as a collector. And of course, his collecting these items was controversial. So he had planned to write a book on the subject and was found with a broken neck in Sitka. So a lot of you probably know all this. And David, if you want to say more about this, or anybody, yeah, feel free after I'm done. Okay. So you can see he collected quite a bit of clan objects. And the controversy, of course, is about, this is part of what we're doing here too. Are the things living online, or are they just a representation, a pointer to things? I mean, I think that they're a pointer, and they're a useful tool because they allow us to make connections. I was going to talk about the Alaska State Libraries, or any library, is a bank, like Robert Bringhurst said. And we need a place to store this very valuable clues to the past. And those clues are also found in places, in physical places. The library is a place to store those representations of the lives that were lived, the human experience, and clues to culture, and I think that these kinds of things that are collected have been viewed with two views. One is, well, it's not really living if you collect it and you stick it in a museum or a library. The other view was, well, we need to preserve these items because they can be lost. And so that is really, I think, the crux of the controversy, right? And, as Robert Bringhurst said, which one do you, well, he didn't say this, but I thought it when he was talking. Which one do you choose? I think they're both important. So, the objectives of the website, as I told you, was to make the indigenous knowledge, to return it in a way, at least make it available, make it known that these objects exist. It's sort of like the Alutig Museum. The museum is slowly agreed to have the collection go back to the museum, but that's a different relationship, so I'm not going to continue talking about that. Okay. So here's a bit about, we've got a few slides of what the website will look like. And you can see, I believe that Louis Shotridge took this photograph, but don't quote me verbatim. But these, I'm going to show you something that I think is interesting, which is the libraries, archives, and museums they're integrating their access through digital means so that researchers can make connections. And the more objects and papers and cards with information and bits and pieces of our experiences are available and brought to light, the more connections we can conceivably make. And now, of course, everything is open to interpretation, and that's important too. Just like place names, the whites who came named things after their last names. The Tlingit people who were here before have very specific descriptive names for the places. So, they mean totally different things. And I'm not an expert on that, but I think there are people here who are experts, and they will be talking about that more too, right? Okay, but
You
what
will
I
also
wanted
be
to
able
show you
see
is
each
here's a
of Shotridge's
photograph.
photographs and to search these by community,
there's Lucy.
by subject, by date, or by an individual person's name.
She's gone. Okay, basically she's telling you that you can search photographs, connect the photographs with the object that you just saw, and connect it with papers.
You'll also be able to see each of Shotridge's written documents and to search on these as well. The column on the left moving from the top, beginning with correspondence, research notes, manuscripts, financial documents, curatorial notes, and the year the document was created. You'll also be able to search across the different categories of the entire collection on a given topic. In addition, Andy Hope III gave us permission to use the wonderful Tlingit map that he developed, and we will be including a timeline, a biographical section about Louis Shotridge, a bibliography, and spaces to enable visitors to the website to make identifications, comments, and suggestions, and to send these to us through an interactive portal. In closing, I'd like to say Gunalchish and to say that as Louis Shotridge himself would have wished, I hope that through this work, Louis Shotridge's important records of Tlingit cultural heritage can serve a purpose once again for Tlingit families and communities. Thank you so much for your patience in listening to this brief recording. And Gunalchish.
Absolutely. Well, I have a whole lot of images that I could show you. They're kind of similar to this in that they just show how you can make connections between objects that are in the museum, papers and photographs that are in the library, in the historical library, and archives. I just wanted to make sure that you understand that in the archives, you're going to find government-produced documents. In the historical library, you're going to find collections that people have donated. So that's going to be photographs and papers. Basically, where the information goes is usually dictated by procedures, by personal desires, by a number of things. And so that's why things are not always found in the same place. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to also, I wanted to mention information services too is the place where you can go to find scholarly journal articles that are going to be online and also accessible through interlibrary loan as well. So all these things tie together, and there are definitely some limitations. And as you've seen, all of the presenters have been giving us an idea that we're collecting this data, we're making it available. There are lots of layers of information that we can put together, and it's very exciting that way. And then the limitations are lack of funding, lack of staff. It's very laborious work to collect this data and put it online, and you've got to scan documents. And would you like to see some? We didn't see any of the Shotridge cards. I know we're out of time. I'm not going to open that unless you really want me to. You want me to? Okay. All right. And so here's in the Alaska State Museum. We've got some very old aprons. If you want me to make comments, I will. I think I'm just going to show you the objects, if that's okay, since we're so short on time. Okay. So, Chilkat blanket baskets. This is Chilkat Village. Okay. So, let's see. This is a list of Russian names in the archives. And it's interesting because that's another connection, a genealogical connection. Court records. Okay, this is just an idea of where to find some of these things. Okay. I was just going to play this in the background as I gave my little spiel. Okay, school records, yeah. Here's Vinokurov. He found a bunch of archival materials just rotting in a basement in New York. This is one of the things that can happen to records. Don't let it happen to yours. I'm also going to give you a plug for the new Archives Rescue Corps. Come in and get some flyers. Look for it on our website. Save your personal items. They're valuable. And we can help you preserve them. Okay, here's a Shotridge card. Okay, so that's Klowak. You can see that. And I just am making some connections. Yep, sure. You want to go back? No, I want to look at the format. Yep. You can come in too, Robbie. Okay. The cards look, they're varied too. I mean, he was very methodical. And at the same time, he just put down what information he could. These are just things from that area. I just thought it'd be interesting to put in some coho salmon. Well, there are genealogical cards and then there are object cards, which refer to the objects at the Penn University Museum. Mm-hmm.
So do you guys have all the cards that were in the Pennsylvania Museum now as well, since you guys had the communication?
No, we're only sharing information over the internet. But we do have about 400 or so. It's enough to look at, I think. Yeah. This is probably the most interesting part of the presentation, yeah? Cape Fox. Okay, well, that's pretty much it. Okay. Thank you. My pronunciation of thank you in Tlingit is really bad, but I'm going to try it anyway. Kunashish.